So, I'm kind of first stood at a conference in 1999 and talked about mobile. I launched the first automotive website back then on something like a Nokia that kind of slid open, a bit like the Matrix, if you remember watching that. And since then, I've seen a lot of change in kind of mobile behaviour and other things. And some of it's come very slow, some of it's come very fast. And I'm here today to talk a little bit about the consumers and how they sit in. They're often underrepresented at these events. And it's kind of good to bring them in and join us. But the other thing I'm going to kind of talk about is, before I kind of get into some hard stats on that, and the slides will be after, so you don't need to know everything down, although my voiceover will have some additional things. Before I kind of get into that, I'm just going to talk a little bit about how some historic technologies were perceived at the time, partly just to kind of try and change some of the mindset, change some of the ways of kind of thinking about mobile. So the first slide I'm going to start with is actually the one I finished with last year, which was around kind of creativity in the first TV ad. Who here has kind of seen this talked about before? I borrowed it from Russell Buckley. Who here's heard about this ad before and how it ran? Not just a couple. I'll do a kind of brief demo. So this was in 1941, the first TV ad that ever ran. I'm going to just kind of do it without the accent. So if we kind of start now. America runs on bull over time, and then a lot more silence. That was the first TV ad. Basically, it took a poster, it took a radio voiceover, put them together, and that was kind of the creativity of the first thing. Now, obviously, it's shifted on a long way since then. Even decades ago, kind of TV creativity had moved forward. But actually, kind of, it borrowed from two media that kind of came before, and it was far from the first to do that. Who knows what this is? It's a Model T Ford. It was called the horseless carriage, or the car, as we know it better. So kind of basically they kind of took two things that existed before, put those two words together to try and define the new something, the new technology. And if we're still calling that the horseless carriage today, we would be in a different place with this. It fundamentally changed a bunch of things like transportation and so on. But it's far from the only example. And actually, Henry Ford, we've talked earlier, and I'm going to say the same thing and echo it. Consumers are ahead of the industry when it comes to mobile. Actually, that wasn't the case back in these days. Henry Ford was famously quoted as saying, if I'd asked people what they wanted, they'd have asked for faster horses. So actually, sometimes, technology kind of comes the other way around. Another one of these is this. Anyone know what this is? This is the wireless telegraph, or the radio, or actually mobile, as it's kind of come on to be known. And there's a guy there called Henrik Hertz, who we've all heard of. If you've heard of megahertz in anything, he's the guy that discovered radio waves. He didn't think they were going to have much impact. He didn't think there was any practical implication for these things that are essential for everything that we do with these devices today. So people who are very much ahead can sometimes underestimate kind of where something's going. And they're far from the only ones. There's the electric candle, or the light bulb. There's the moving pictures, or the movies. And one of my favourite ones from the late 90s, the information superhighway, which we kind of call digital nowadays. But basically, with our human need to simplify things, we kind of give them labels based on old ways of thinking. And actually, that underestimates their impact and kind of how they're changing things. And some of the things that Clive kind of talked about were very much about that. Some of the very early mobile things, it's just, one-dimensional. It's kind of moved on in a big way from there. But actually, I'm going to kind of say the same things kind of happening with mobile. We kind of put these two words together, mobile media, mobile web, mobile apps, even mobile phone, which we don't really call it anymore. It tends to be the mobile. But I'm kind of saying all of these are wrong. We're going to have a new word for this stuff in the future. I'm not going to kind of pretend I know what the answer is, but actually we're going to be talking about these things in many different ways. One of the ways I just like to kind of think about that is imagine the credit card in your wallet. Imagine the £10 note in your wallet. Now imagine that's connected to the internet all the time and has a screen and a keyboard. Do you think your payment behaviour is likely to change? Almost certainly we're going to see some new behaviours coming out of these things as it kind of brings new opportunities. And kind of what I'm going to ask you to do is try and remember some of those things within this day, and as you kind of go back to your offices, and kind of make sure you don't end up like the boss in this cartoon. In this case, actually, the boss is way behind his staff, who are not paying any attention at all. They're just playing on their mobile devices. In fact, I could even argue, I think we may need a mobile strategy is actually wrong. Actually, Eric Schmidt's often quoted as saying this, but it wasn't. It was an analyst. if you don't have a mobile strategy, then you don't have a future strategy. The whole point is that mobile is shifting things, and if it's not instrumental in what you're doing, then actually you're not looking to the future and kind of what's happening. So kind of worth remembering some of those things. So consumer insight, I'm here to talk a little bit about, having spoken about the past and try to kind of set the framework of thinking about things in a different way, talking about how consumers are using these things first. So I'm going to talk about devices, social, advertising, retail, location, and a little bit on payments. Some of these I'll do very briefly because we've got other speakers in the day kind of talking about those. But the first thing I'm going to say is actually that mobile changes the world. So World Bank research has shown that actually an increase in mobile penetration of 10% actually shifts GDP. It shifts it even more in a developing country than a developed country. And actually mobile broadband, so 3G, faster connection, has an even bigger impact, kind of almost double the impact in terms of how it shifts GDP within a country. That is fundamentally changing behaviour in a big and good way. And actually kind of the graph on there's the World Bank logo at the top, and underneath that is BRIC, Brazil, Russia, India and China. If we just kind of think about the rest of the world, China Mobile alone has over 650 million subscribers. Just to give you an idea of scale. It has over 1 million shops. It has 900,000 base stations. And actually there, technology is leapfrogging the old ways. So actually we're going straight from wires actually to the new technologies, and actually they're even adopting in these countries the new mobile technologies. 4G is out in other places before it's here, partly because they haven't got the history and the legacy kind of systems to kind of deal with. So fundamentally kind of mobile is having a big difference. But if we zoom in on the UK, we'll actually see there are 28.6 million monthly media users here in the UK, according to Comscore, which is up 26% year on year. This is a big number. This is people doing it a lot and doing it in a big way, and I'll kind of come on to kind of a little bit more on that. But actually part of what's driving that is smartphone. Actually, if you're a smartphone user, you're almost three times more likely to use mobile media. Mobile media being defined as everything that's not really voice and text. Actually, it even excludes if you receive an advert as a text message and reply to it. That's kind of outside of mobile media, so it's even kind of great if we look at it. But the two things go together. Not because the smartphone fundamentally is better, wonderful, exciting, but actually it kind of tends to come with two things. One, it makes it much easier, so it's easier to impact consumer behaviour. And secondly, it tends to come with a data plan and takes away the kind of uncertainty around cost, so people just engage. And actually what we've seen in the last year, as this has trended more towards the population average, so it started off a lot of men, and actually it's trending and almost towards kind of a 50-50 split. And similarly, we're seeing the average age getting older, as actually kind of the early adopters and everyone else kind of turns into the mass market. Smartphone operating systems get talked about far more than they are important in the scheme of things. But I thought, we should put it in here, just kind of a couple of takeouts. Firstly, kind of in the last year, Google Android has shifted a long way. Apple has stayed relatively flat in terms of percentage share, but the market has got much bigger, so it's still been a good year for them. And Apple users over-index pretty much on most mobile media usage. In other words, if you're an iPhone user, you're more likely to do many of these different things. But actually kind of one of the takeouts for this is develop cross-platform. Don't just kind of do an Android app, don't just do an iPhone app. Bear in mind with Android, there's lots of different versions, lots of different OEMs. You need to make sure it works in the different places, multiple app stores. But if you're going to kind of do this, do something cross-platform. That doesn't mean build an app on each thing. Actually, it might mean kind of build mobile web. It might mean do SMS, kind of back to kind of Clive's point earlier. Those things work on pretty much all devices. Don't alienate some of your core customers. And in fact, actually, kind of more people use browsers than use apps. The graph on the left comes from Orange Exposure Research, and kind of the blue bar shows web browsers and the purple application users. Actually, a lot of people are doing the same thing. And if you look at the graph on the right, actually this is from Comscore, it's showing that actually for the BBC, people are more likely to access it via a browser. For Sky, they're more likely to access it via an app. Some of that is self-fulfilling. If the only way to watch Sky is through an app, you're going to have more users through that. So basically, I know there's a debate on this earlier, but I'm going to kind of tee that up a little bit and say consumer decisions are driven by their situation and the options they have. If I'm looking at a tube map, I'm going to look at that as an app because it doesn't kind of work without a signal on the ground. So you need something offline. But if you want to read the news and get up to date on that, actually maybe you're far more likely to go and have a look at the BBC, a mobile website.